She wasn't following a trail, she was chasing a dog with a limp and a coat matted from weeks of surviving alone. The sun was high, the wind was still, and the land hadn't seen a visitor in years. But the moment she saw the mansion half swallowed by ivy, roof caving in, windows gaping like old wounds, something deep in her bones told her this wasn't just another abandoned ruin. It was waiting for her. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this stir something in you, stories where the land speaks, where forgotten places whisper secrets, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode might just rewrite everything you thought you knew about the past. She first saw it near the north fence line, a white and brown mutt pacing just beyond the rusted posts. It looked too clean to be feral, but too skittish to belong to anyone nearby. When she clapped her hands to scare it off, it simply tilted its head, then trotted a few yards down the fence and sat there watching, tail still, like it was waiting for her to do something. By the third day, it was still there. She'd tried ignoring it, then leaving scraps out by the edge of the field, thinking it would eat and leave. It didn't. The food vanished, but the dog remained. Always the same spot, always facing the ranch house, eyes fixed like it knew something she didn't. It wasn't hunger keeping it there. It was something else. The ranch hadn't seen a stranger in weeks. Not since the last feed delivery. Not since the neighbor sold off his cattle and moved closer to town. She hadn't minded the quiet. The open skies and cracked earth suited her better than city noise or polite conversations. She didn't think much about the past. Not until the dog arrived. It was late afternoon when she finally approached it. Slowly, no sudden moves, hands low and voice soft. It didn't run. Just stood, turned, and began to walk away, glancing back every few steps to make sure she was following. She paused. Something in her gut told her this wasn't just a curious animal or a bored stray. She grabbed her hat, whistled once for good measure, and followed. The dog led her across the back pasture, past a rusted windmill and through a line of cottonwoods she hadn't walked in years. The grass grew higher there, dry and bristling against her jeans. The wind had dropped off entirely, and her boots thudded against the cracked soil with an odd finality. When the dog vanished over a rise, she nearly turned back. Then she saw the roof, slate shingles, broken and caved in on one side. A two-story structure half covered in ivy and creeping moss, tucked into the cradle of the land like it had grown there. The porch sagged at the center, and one shutter hung like a broken arm. But the front door still stood, shut, waiting. She stopped in her tracks. She had lived on this land for 7 years, and not once had she seen or heard of a structure out here. The dog sat at the edge of the grass, just shy of the steps, tail flicking once against the ground. She felt the back of her neck prickle. This place wasn't marked on her deed. It wasn't on any of the old maps, but it was real. It was standing. And somehow, impossibly, it had been here long before she ever was. She stepped closer. The porch groaned beneath her boots. The dog didn't move. Something about the air changed. She reached for the doorknob. The doorknob turned easier than it should have. No rusted crunch, no creak of resistance, just a soft click, like it had been opened recently. She hesitated, one hand still on the brass, the other resting against the frame. Her breath felt loud in the stillness. The dog hadn't followed her onto the porch. It waited, rooted in place, gaze fixed not on her, but the door, like it knew what was behind it. Inside, the air was colder, not musty like she expected, not choked with dust or mildew. Cooler, cleaner, like the house had been sealed just days ago. A single shaft of sunlight slanted in from a broken second-floor window, catching on floating particles that danced like ash. The floor was warped in places, but solid under her boots. She stepped lightly, trying to understand the shape of the silence. To the left, a parlor. Faint floral wallpaper peeled in long vertical strips. A green velvet armchair sat near the cold hearth, its seat sunken from weight long gone. On the mantel, a framed photograph. The glass cracked. She moved closer and lifted it gently. 3 people. A man, a woman, and a girl in pigtails standing beside what looked like this very house, though in the picture. The paint was fresh and the windows weren't broken. She moved through the hallway, noting the detail. Crown molding, beadboard wainscoting. Every corner held care. Someone had built this place with pride, not haste, and yet no one had spoken of it. No old-timers at the diner, no realtors, No stories passed through the ranching grapevine. She had lived in this county for years and never once heard a word about a mansion tucked away in her own backfield. In the kitchen, vines had broken through the window above the sink, curling along the cabinets and across the floor. But the stove was intact, gas-fed, old but not antique. She opened a drawer beside it and froze. Inside were silver utensils, still nested in a velvet-lined tray, untouched by weather, not buried in dust, as if someone still lived here or had been planning to return. Then she saw the floor. Noticed it, really. The scuffed planks were darker in a rectangular patch near the pantry, and the wood in that section looked new or replaced. She crouched, running her fingers along the seams. They weren't flush. Someone had removed and reinstalled them. Recently, a sharp bark from outside made her jump. She turned, heart pounding, and ran to the front door. The dog was gone. She stepped off the porch, scanning the fields. Nothing. No sound. Just the wind picking up again and brushing through the overgrown trees like a whisper. She turned back to the house. Ivy clung tighter than before, wrapping the second-floor windows like green hands. And for just a moment, she thought she saw movement behind the glass. A flicker, a shape. But when she looked again, there was nothing. Just the mansion. Waiting. She didn't go back inside right away. Instead, she stood on the porch with her arms folded tight across her chest, trying to steady the breath that didn't want to come. The dog was gone, vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, and that should have bothered her more than it did. But what unsettled her most was the feeling in her stomach, not fear exactly, but recognition. Like her body remembered something her mind didn't. Eventually, she went back inside. The door eased shut behind her with a whisper that sounded too much like the word stay. She moved room to room, slower now, letting her eyes adjust. Every creak in the floorboard, every shadow across the wall, felt like a presence. Not hostile, but watchful. The house wasn't just old, it was aware. She ended up in the parlor again, drawn there by something she couldn't name. The fireplace stood tall and square, the mantel unadorned now that the photo had been moved. She knelt and ran her hand across the stone ledge beneath it, smooth granite, blackened by decades of soot, and then her fingers caught at a groove. Carved into the corner where stone met floorboard, she brushed away the dirt, heart beginning to race. 5 letters. C.T. Rowan. It wasn't the name that made her blood run cold. It was the fact that she knew it. That name hadn't passed her lips in years, but it had been etched into the family Bible that sat untouched in a cedar box in her attic. Her grandfather's name, but he died in Arkansas. Or at least, that's what they'd told her. She sat back hard on her heels. The floor seemed to tilt under her. C.T. Rowan had been her mother's father, a hard man, by all accounts. One who left the family when her mom was just a girl, and was said to have died not long after. He'd been a myth more than a memory, a name spoken in stories meant to warn more than inspire. But now that name was here, carved into a house no one seemed to know existed, on land she thought was empty. She stood up and stepped back, her thoughts racing. Had her family once owned this place? Had they abandoned it? Forgotten it? Or had someone gone to great lengths to make sure it was erased? A draft stirred the curtains, though no window was open. Something shifted in the walls, a pop, a sigh, and it felt like the house was breathing again, waking up from some long sleep. She left the parlor with her heart pounding, but her steps more certain. She wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was connected to this place, and if her grandfather had once walked these halls, there was no telling what else had been buried here. She couldn't sleep that night. Not back at the ranch, not in her own bed. Her body lay still under the sheets, but her mind kept circling the mansion like the stray dog had once circled her gate. The name in the stone had rewired something inside her. Memories she didn't remember having surfaced in fragments, the smell of pipe smoke, a deep voice reading aloud, the scrape of boots on wood. None of them made sense, but none of them felt false, either. By morning, she'd made up her mind. She packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and a thermos of coffee, threw on her thickest flannel. If she was going to find answers, they were going to be buried deep. That floorboard in the kitchen, the one that didn't sit flush, it had her attention now. Back at the mansion, the house greeted her like it had been expecting her. The sun hadn't risen far, but light already spilled through the trees, landing on the porch like a spotlight. The ivy clung harder than ever, its tendrils thicker, as if the house was slowly swallowing itself whole. She ignored it. Inside, Nothing had shifted since yesterday, though it felt like everything had changed. She crossed the kitchen floor, knelt by the patch of mismatched boards, and wedged the crowbar in. The wood gave with a reluctant crack. Underneath, darkness. She reached for her flashlight and leaned in. A narrow crawl space, no deeper than 2 feet, ran beneath the floor. Dust danced in the beam's cone, and cobwebs clung like veils. Her breath caught. Just inches in, stacked neatly like someone had planned their burial, were letters, dozens of them, wrapped in twine, stained with water damage and time, sealed with red wax that had long since crumbled. She reached in and pulled the top bundle out. The paper was heavy, expensive. On the first envelope, an unfamiliar crest was pressed into the corner, 2 crossed keys beneath a sunburst. The handwriting was careful, angular. She opened one. The letter inside wasn't a love note. It wasn't a will or a confession. It was instructions, detailed, specific, and dated over 50 years ago. Mentions of land surveys, relocation efforts, military units with numbers instead of names, code words like Project Gethsemane and Echo Settlement Clearance. She flipped through the others. More of the same, different handwriting, different seals, all addressed to someone named C.T. Rowan. She sat back on the cold kitchen floor, the pages spread around her like fallen leaves. This wasn't just a family mystery anymore. These letters were evidence of something wide-reaching, something organized. Whatever her grandfather had been part of, it hadn't just driven him from the family, it had driven him into hiding. And if these letters had been hidden, it was because someone didn't want them found. The dog hadn't led her to a ruin, it had led her to a secret, one people might still be willing to kill for. She didn't hear the truck until it was already too close. The sound of tires crunching dry leaves came as she was stuffing the last of the letters back into the floor. She froze, heart hammering, ears straining to listen. Another crunch, a door slam. Heavy footsteps on the porch outside. No knock, just the creak of old boards and the weight of someone who knew they weren't trespassing. She rose quietly, brushing dust from her knees, and tucked the final envelope into her jacket. Her fingers trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the knowledge that whatever this place was, someone else remembered it too. A figure appeared in the front doorway. Wide shoulders, tan hat, badge catching the early Sunday Sheriff Avery. She hadn't seen him in months, not since the wildfire last summer when he'd rolled through her land to check on containment. He was older than she remembered. Slower, too, but the way he looked at her now, neutral, unreadable, made something in her gut twist. "I heard someone was poking around out here," he said finally. "Didn't expect it to be you." She didn't answer. Not right away. Her hand instinctively hovered near the envelope in her coat pocket. He stepped inside without asking, looked around the parlor like he'd been there before. "This place," he said, trailing off. His eyes scanned the peeling wallpaper, the broken chair, the empty mantel. "You know this house was supposed to be condemned back in '72. She raised an eyebrow. "Then why's it still standing?" He glanced at her. "Some places get missed. Some places people want forgotten." His gaze landed on her jacket, not directly on the envelope, but close enough. She shifted subtly, putting the counter between them. "You find anything?" he asked, voice calm. "Like what?" she replied, keeping her tone even. He smiled a little, like they were trading cards instead of secrets. "You'd be surprised what people stash in old places. Guns, whiskey, memories." She crossed her arms. "You come out here often?" he shrugged. "Used to. Back when folks still talked about it. Now, not so much." She could feel the silence folding in around them. The house seemed to hold its breath. Then his eyes sharpened. "Who else have you told?" It wasn't a question someone asked unless they already knew there was something worth hiding. Her jaw tightened. "No one." He nodded slowly, as if that answer satisfied something, or confirmed a risk. He stepped back toward the porch, one boot creaking the floor. "If I were you," he said, "I'd leave this place be. Let the dead stay buried. There's history in these walls, sure, but not all of it's meant to be remembered." And then he was gone. She stood alone in the hallway, the floor still open behind her, the letters warm against her chest. She didn't know which part of the encounter unsettled her more, the fact that the sheriff knew about the house, or the fact that he expected her to obey. The dog was back the next morning. She spotted it from the window while making coffee, sitting at the edge of the orchard like a statue. Same spot as before, same posture. But this time, its head was lowered, nose to the ground, paws pushing at something buried beneath the grass. She watched it for a long moment, the mug warm in her hands and a question burning at the back of her mind. "What are you trying to show me now?" She didn't wait to finish the coffee. Outside, the air was crisp, the dew clinging to her boots as she crossed the uneven yard. The dog looked up when she approached, its eyes calm but expectant, then resumed its digging. Dirt kicked up in slow, measured strokes, not frantic, not playful, deliberate. She knelt beside it. There was something in the soil, just below the surface. Not metal, not wood, stone. She brushed back the earth carefully with her hands until the top of a small marker was revealed. Rectangular, hand-carved. Not part of any cemetery she knew. No name, no date. Just a symbol, chiseled deep and rough into the stone's face. 2 crossed keys beneath a sunburst. Her breath caught. It was the same seal from the letters. She ran her fingers across the cold surface, tracing the grooves. Whoever was buried here, or whatever this marked, had been laid to rest with intention. Quietly, privately. There were no other markers in sight. Just this one, nestled in the grass like a secret even the land was reluctant to keep. The dog stepped back, sitting again, tail still, waiting. She turned toward the house. Suddenly, the scale of everything shifted. This wasn't just a forgotten estate. It was a vault. A memory sealed off by time, by silence, and now, by fear. The sheriff's words echoed in her ears, not all of it's meant to be remembered, and she finally understood they weren't just a warning. They were a threat. She looked down at the stone again. Who had been buried here? And why in secret? The more she thought about it, the more certain she became this was personal. The seal wasn't some obscure military insignia or bureaucratic flourish. It meant something to her family, to C.T. Rowan, to the reason her mother never spoke of her father. She sat back on her heels, the dog beside her, both of them watching the mansion rise against the morning sky. She felt the weight of something vast and old settling on her shoulders. Like history itself had turned toward her, whispering not in words, but through symbols, places, and a mutt that refused to leave. This was no longer about curiosity, it was about inheritance, and the more she uncovered, the more dangerous the truth would become. But turning back now would be a betrayal not just to the past, but to whatever legacy had been buried beneath this soil. She rose to her feet. It was time to find out what else the house was hiding. She hadn't noticed the second photo until the light hit the frame just right. It was tucked behind a stack of crumbling books in the upstairs study, a narrow room at the top of the stairs, where the windows were still intact and the air smelled like old paper and cedar. She'd gone up there searching for ledgers or letters, anything else the sheriff might have missed or tried to hide. But what she found instead stopped her cold. The frame was simple wood, dark and weathered. The glass cracked across one corner, obscuring part of the image. But the woman inside, she was unmistakable. The hair was longer. The clothes were old-fashioned. But the jawline, the set of the eyes, the way the braid curled over her shoulder, it was like looking into a mirror of someone half-remembered. The resemblance was uncanny, too close to be a coincidence. Her hands trembled as she lifted the frame. There was no name, no date, no writing on the back. Just a photograph that looked nearly a century old, holding the ghost of a face that could have been hers. She stared at the woman's eyes. They didn't smile, but they weren't cold either. They were focused, like they knew something, like they'd seen everything already, and were waiting to see what she would do with it now. She sank into the dusty armchair beside the bookshelf, photo resting in her lap. Her heart wouldn't slow down. Was this her grandmother or great-grandmother? Someone no one had ever told her about? Or was it possible, in the way time bends around blood and silence, that this woman wasn't a direct relative, but a shadow left behind by choices that had echoed across generations? She rose and searched the study. Inside the desk were more documents, some too faded to read, others stamped with that same twin-key seal. She found land assessments, water rights applications, even a folded map with several properties marked in red ink, including the very ground she now stood on. But no names, no confirmation, just patterns, layers, threads waiting to be pulled. She looked back at the photo. This house had once belonged to a woman like her, not just in features, but in spirit. Someone who didn't run, someone who stayed. She held the photo close and walked back to the window. The land outside stretched wide and golden beneath the midday sun, orchard trees swaying gently, the dog now resting beneath the same cottonwood where it always waited. Something had drawn her here, something in her blood, and now, the house wasn't just offering secrets, it was offering memory. And that scared her more than any letter or grave ever could, because memory can't be buried once it's alive. She didn't want to go into town, but the questions were piling up faster than the house could answer them, and the name C.T. Rowan had burned itself into the back of her mind like a brand. If there were people who still remembered the family, still remembered the mansion, they wouldn't be out in the hills. They'd be sipping coffee in the diner, filing papers in the records office, sweeping the library floors like nothing ever happened. So she dressed plain, no makeup, hair braided tight. She left the letters hidden beneath the floor and the photo tucked into her coat. The dog didn't follow her this time. It just watched from the tree line, tail still, head low. The town hadn't changed in 20 years. Same crooked lampposts, same paint-chipped courthouse, same old-timers parked on benches as if they were part of the landscape. When she walked past them, their eyes followed. Not rudely, just aware. Like they recognized something in her before they even knew why. The library was nearly empty. She headed for the county records room. Dust lingered in the corners, and the computer behind the desk looked like it hadn't been updated since the last war. An older woman with silver hair and reading glasses sat behind the circulation counter. She smiled when she approached, until she heard the name. C.T. Rowan, the woman repeated, her hands pausing mid-type. That name's not familiar. I found some documents. Said he lived out near the West pasture lands, she added, careful not to mention the mansion just yet. Years ago, pre-1970 seconds, maybe earlier, the librarian offered a polite, closed-lip smile. I can check the archive, but I doubt there's much from out that way. A lot of that land changed hands informally. Not everything made it into public record. I'd still like to look. I'll let you know if anything turns up. The woman never moved, never reached for the drawer, never typed a thing. Outside, she tried the diner. Asked the waitress, someone she vaguely remembered from high school, if anyone knew the Rowan name. This time, she didn't even get a polite excuse, just silence. Then, we don't talk about that side of the valley. By mid-afternoon, she tried the post office. The clerk didn't look up. The church doors were locked. The sheriff's cruiser sat parked near the edge of town, engine idling, but no one in the driver's seat. Everywhere she turned, the doors were closed, but not just physically, intentionally, deliberately. She sat in her truck for nearly an hour, parked at the far end of Main Street, trying to make sense of it. They weren't protecting a person, they were protecting a story, one they'd all agreed, somewhere along the way, to keep buried. And if that many people had made a silent pact to forget, then what she'd found at the mansion wasn't just personal history. It was a danger, the kind that made entire towns lie. She saw the flames before she saw the truck. It was dusk, the sky bleeding orange into lavender. When she rounded the last bend on her way back to the mansion, the horizon flickered not with sunset, but with smoke. She killed her headlights, heart hammering as the familiar outline of a pickup came into view. Parked just off the dirt path, backed up to the orchard, its bed piled with boxes, and fire. A small pit burned 10 feet from the rear bumper, its smoke drifting low in the windless air. A figure stood beside it, broad shoulders, hunched forward, feeding papers into the flames like someone performing a ritual. She crouched behind a tree, close enough to see the man's movements but too far to make out his face. She waited. Pages crackled and curled in the fire, their corners catching like kindling. Every few seconds, he'd glance toward the house, like he expected someone to come out, like he wasn't sure if he was alone. She crept closer, low and quiet. Her boots crunched a dry leaf, and the man's head snapped up. But he didn't call out, didn't chase. Instead, he grabbed the last box from the truck bed and dumped the entire stack into the flames. She got a better look then. It wasn't the sheriff, but it wasn't a stranger either. It was Tom Holloway, the records clerk from the courthouse. She'd seen him a dozen times over the years, filing land deeds, stamping permits, always polite, always forgettable. But now, watching him burn county documents behind a lost mansion, she saw him differently. He finished and walked fast toward the truck. The engine growled to life, tires spitting gravel as he peeled away, leaving the fire snapping behind him. She waited until he was gone before moving in. The flames had eaten most of it. Blackened paper fluttered like ash moths in the smoke. She grabbed a stick and pushed through the embers, trying to salvage anything that hadn't caught fully. One document had only half burned. The top corner remained enough for a seal, a heading, and a name. Rowan. C.T. Settlement Revision Authority. Project Gethsemane Confidential. She sat back, smoke stinging her eyes. Her hands shook. The rest was too charred to read. But the implication was clear. This wasn't just about family. This was about government, secrets, relocations, maybe even disappearances. And someone, or multiple someones, had decided it was safer to burn the past than let it be found. She looked toward the mansion, its windows dark now, no light inside, but still holding that same strange pull. The dog sat on the porch again, head resting on its paws. She thought of the photo upstairs, of the carved name in the hearth, of the town that had pretended none of it ever existed. And she realized, if they were still trying to erase it, then the truth wasn't just dangerous, it was alive. She spent one last night in the mansion. No flashlight, no coffee, no digging through floorboards or following dogs into orchards. Just a single candle in the parlor and the photograph in her lap, the woman's eyes reflecting the flame like they were still watching, still waiting. The house creaked and whispered in its own language, and for once, she didn't try to interpret it. She just listened. By morning, the dog was gone again. The kind of gone that felt final. She stood on the porch with the cool wind at her back, staring out over the land that had somehow changed everything. Not with violence, not with noise, but with slow, quiet truths that refused to stay buried. The house, the letters, the grave, the photo, they had all been fragments of a story no one had dared to finish. Her grandfather hadn't disappeared. He'd been erased, moved out of memory and into silence by people who'd written the rules and then burned them when they no longer served. But he had left something behind. A place, a record, a bloodline, and now, her. She could have brought in lawyers, news cameras, archaeologists. She could have pushed through every locked door in that courthouse and forced names into the light. But instead, she chose something different. She chose to remember. She sealed the letters in a waterproof container and buried them beneath the hearthstone, just behind the name carved in granite. She placed the photograph in a wooden frame and set it on the mantel, clean now, polished until it gleamed. She walked the orchard slowly, each step planting memory back into the soil, not to expose, but to honor. Then she locked the front door with a key that didn't belong to her and placed it under the third porch board, the one that creaked when you stepped too far left. The mansion didn't need to be open to everyone. It just needed to not be forgotten. She drove back to her ranch with the window down, the wind whipping her braid behind her like a banner. The town would keep lying. The sheriff would keep watching. Holloway would probably find some new records to burn. But the land knew, and so did she. In the weeks that followed, she planted a tree near the orchard, not close enough to the grave to disturb it, but near enough that its roots would stretch in that direction over time. She told no one about the mansion, not because she was afraid, because it wasn't theirs to find. It had been meant for her. One day, maybe, someone else would come, someone with the same jawline, the same silent ache in their bones, and maybe they'd find the key, or maybe the house would call them in its own way. Until then, it would sleep, and so would the truth, not lost, not gone, just waiting.